I think and maybe this is good because you just mentioned the book, but one of our company values is a line that somebody said to us, just like generosity breeds luck. One thing that we've very much learned from open source is when we put good things out in the world, when you try to help people learn how to build agents, and good things will come back to you when you put good things out in the world. And I think that's a lesson of life. It's a lesson of leadership. It's a lesson of a lot of things.
Yes. I have to say, last week, I was struggling with something and I was like, I just need some freedom. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Leadership Exchange podcast. I'm so excited to be here today. My name's Tracy. You can follow me on LinkedIn at Tracy Lee or on X at Lady Leet. I'm here with Sam Bhagwat today, who is the co-founder CEO of Mastra AI. It's Mastra.ai. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Tracy.
Yes. And Sam, I've known about you for quite a long time because we both come from the web ecosystem. So, for those who don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about what you've done previously and what you're doing now.
Yeah, so previously I was the co-founder of GatsbyJS, which is a React web framework, a framework for building websites. So we sort of that started in 2015, and then we sold the company to Netlify. We got to a few million in revenue. We sold the company to Netlify in 2023. It was a tool that sort of hundreds of thousands of developers used to learn how to build in React.
Yes, I love that. And I mean, anybody on the web, I feel like knows what Gatsby is, I would hope. um, yes, yes. And then right now you're doing Mastra. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So Mastra is an open source TypeScript framework for building AI agents. As you know, we are all aware, increasingly people are wanting to build AI features into their software products. And so a lot of people are using Mastra to do that. They're also building agents that maybe help with internal tooling inside larger companies.
Mm-hmm. Love that. And I just love seeing all of my web friends. I mean, we were discussing this before the call. I love seeing all of my web friends go into AI and start
Yes.
building there. And what I think is really cool again is again, you co-founded, started a company back in 2015 that got acquired, of course. And now you're building something pretty similar, right? Open source in AI. Like what sort of patterns, just as a founder, as a builder, as a CEO, do you see that you just feel really good about sort of like this next iteration?
Well, I think to kind of your first comment, it's interesting as you watch sort of a group of people in one kind of community move to this, new community, the
Hmm.
sort of AI development community. And what I think is really interesting is that the folks working in the web developer tool, the web tooling ecosystem really care about making things that are easy for developers to use. I mean, JavaScript is just the most usable kind of programming language by folks who maybe aren't experts in programming. And I think a lot of us, as we've kind of moved over from the web domain to sort of the AI domain, we've kind of brought that same you know passion about making tools that are easy for people to use to AI, and kind of making it more accessible for folks. I actually think that's a lot of, if you think about sort of we're now building and so for some context, we started building Mastra about 9 months ago in October of 2024. We went through Y Combinator in winter. We've kind of brought a lot of we've become a quite popular sort of framework fairly quickly. And that's one of the reasons, is just because AI is kind of moving so quickly. We've brought a lot of the team sort of from Gatsby over to Mastra. We've kind of sort of
I love that.
yeah, we just kind of called up our old friends and we're like, hey, this is what we're doing now. Would you like to
That's
kind of come over?
great.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's so amazing because we were actually just having a conversation yesterday about the whole idea that, AI is really about sort of like the nuances in communication, right?
Hmm.
It really becomes like you have to be able to communicate with a tool better.
Yeah.
And
No.
then,
Very much.
you think about it though, and, somebody was saying, one of the reasons why AI adoption is a struggle for some developers is because they expect sort of, you have to think of it as, this tool has never, if you call it a human or a thing, right? Like it's never worked with you before. So,
Mm-hmm.
you haven't like built up that sort of,
Mm-hmm.
unsaid sort of like understanding, if you will. But then when you're working with teams that you've worked with for years and years, it's like then all of a sudden when you guys come together, it just gels. It gels so much more.
Well, and I think to the interesting part too is like, as we've kind of like brought folks over, there's a little bit of a ramp up in terms of, hey, here are all the AI concepts that like you sort of need to know to like work on this, framework for building agents. And so we have gotten to watch 10 or 12 people kind of go through this sort of cycle, and so we can watch sort of the 4 to 6 weeks of them like ramping up on all the things. But we know that they're great, they're like really talented folks, they're just like new to a domain.
We'll be back to the episode in a second, but first, I'd like to acknowledge the team behind the channel, This.Labs. We're seeing 3x to 5x productivity improvements with our teams and clients using tools like Cursor, Claude Code, and GitHub Copilot. We help teams adopt these technologies and get max value out of them through strategic partnerships, trainings, and other software engineering services. Check us out at ai.this.co. Thanks, now back to the video.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I absolutely love that. And it's gonna be exciting to see like what percentage of AI people are going to be, or sorry, what percentage of web people are going to be in the AI space in the next, like, is it just going to be like, what is it like web 4.0? Like, is that kind of like what we're dealing with here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were kind of before this podcast like making a list of names, and I think we could just kind of like keep going down of like the big names, and I do think there is a trend because um, the way that I think about AI is that it's almost like it's this, when I get in groups of like founders and we kind of all sit together and we're like, what's the analogy for this? We're like, is it cloud? No, it feels bigger than cloud, and it's happening faster than cloud. And
Mhm.
when I sit together with groups of founders, like we're all maybe this is my age cohort or whatever, but we tend to be like, I just turned 37, so we tend to be somewhere in our 30s or whatever. And we're just kind of like, was this what it was like in 1995, when the internet was like the thing? Like maybe that's the only analogy we can.
Call it Brendan Ike and be like, Brendan, what are you?
Yeah,
I mean,
something like
he's
that.
coming
Yeah,
up
I'm
with
no,
like Brave now, right? And
yeah.
it seems like they're sort of like, I don't know if they're pivoting, but I mean, things are obviously evolving based on, sort of like the new developments that are happening.
Yeah, I think to us like it feels there's this sort of like sense of like like it's sort of like it's happening all at once, and it touches kind of everything, and it changes, like there's so many different workflows get changed by it, and so everybody has started talking about it and started like it's almost like we're all kind of like working together through like what this new world looks like.
Yeah, yeah, which is it's exciting, and it's exciting to do it with friends too.
I think
Um,
so.
so again, a lot of listeners on this are leaders within different organizations, and a lot of success, of course, is about sort of pattern recognition and matching. So, what are some of the things that you're sort of seeing that are similar to what you built before?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of share this just as someone that's now building a second company that's again many ways like very similar to the first company that we built, right? Um, and to kind of share some of the similarities. One of the things that you know one of the things that we learned over time at Gatsby was how to just make things that are really easy for people to use. And it, like, that sounds simple, but it turns out there's like 10 different layers to it. That sort of like, for example, like what does like a good CLI getting started experience look like? What does a good kind of like, if you have a concept, like an overview page and a documentation look like? And then like a really good like reference material, and then like really good like examples for that document. And then like what does, like, how do you make it sort of like performant, that particular like feature, like really performant? And then like how do you make it clear when you should be using this sort of API versus like that API, and like have API design, and then like name your APIs really well so that it's like really clear. Like sometimes you see these like 5-word APIs where it's like get function from X thing, and you're like, look, I can't even read that thing. I would like 2 words instead of like 5
Mhm.
words. Or sort of like, then how do you make sure there's like a really seamless like deployment experience where like, how do you make sure there's like a really seamless like local development environment where like the experience of like working with this kind of primitive or feature on your local machine is like really good, but then also how do you make it really easy to take that and like deploy it into production, wherever, right? And so you just, there's sort of like that kind of like, just like that. Ultimately, when we're building a framework, right? When you think about like what is a framework is sort of your outsourced CTO around a particular domain. Like we sort of create the primitives for like the development, that like they have to be rich enough for the development uh, team to like play with and build meaningful things without kind of getting stuck, without saying, hey, this is an abstraction that like I can't get low level enough, I can't do the thing I want to do. And so we need to encapsulate a lot of the domain knowledge in there. And so if we're doing our job well, then we've kind of created this primitive that's easy to get started with, easy to use, easy to deploy. And I think like that lesson took like a while, I think, for us to get really good at Gatsby. And I think maybe by the time we finally got good at it, we kind of sold the company was at a place where we decided to sell the company. And then I think like this time around, it's almost like we get to take a lot of those lessons and do it together. But I think there's actually also something to call out, which is like coming back to this like idea of like a leadership podcast. Some of those skills are like in my head, but some of those skills are in like various of the team members' heads. We all learned different things, and we all sort of had this team where we were kind of like playing different positions and passing the ball around. And so like I could know that like I didn't need to know this thing really well because Tyler did it, or like Abhi did it, or Shane did it. And so like now like we're each able to like go really deep and then bring it over and sort of like keep going really deep on that thing while trusting each other. There's something just really there's something really special about developing that like deep kind of like trust and like and almost like sense of like, hey, they're over here, I can pass the ball like right now, kind of.
Yes, I'm so fortunate that my team, my leadership team, and a lot of my engineers have been there for so many years. But again, I mean, we're just reflecting on, you wake up and 10 years later,
Yeah. And now we all have kids and this
I
stuff, and that
know, I
changes.
know.
But like who we are kind of stays fairly constant, and how we can hopefully work with each other through time.
Yeah. I definitely they do say, right, like as you get older, I think, I mean, Instagram, I get sniped by all the yesterday I learned that the fake turf is not good and they're banning it in Europe.
Okay.
I learned that people might not be gluten sensitive, but they're actually sensitive to the whatever Roundup or whatever. So like in Europe, so I'm like thinking about buying oats. So this might be another sort of like snipe type situation. But
Well, and what I've never started calling it X. Maybe it's just that I grew up calling it Twitter.
This is
So
the second time I called it X. So this is you were the first pleasure for me introducing X. Yeah, I agree though. I agree. But are we the uncool people now though? Is that
but maybe that's inevitable. I don't know.
yeah. What other sort of like big lessons have you sort of like learned through that journey, or are there situations in which we're all scarred by our experiences, right? And so what are some of sort of like those things where you're like, oh, we'll never do this again?
I think we had this experience at Gatsby where we released this API called themes. And it was kind of like what you might expect from like a WordPress type theming API, in the sense that we were trying to like make these like reusable templates. But it was very confusing to figure out how they would be used. We basically, to get a little bit into the weeds, there were like multiple places where you could, if you named a file a certain thing and put it in a certain location, it would overwrite the theme. But like it almost gave you too many options. Without giving you clear guidelines around how to use it. And actually, like I don't actually think that the challenge was that we released this, although I don't think it was a good idea that we released it. It was that after we released it, we then had a hackathon helping the community like build these. And then we kind of kept doubling down on it for like the next 2 or 3 months, and then finally we were sort of like, oh, this is the wrong thing. um, and I think, there's just like, it's okay to make mistakes. It's totally okay to make mistakes. But what you need to do is you need to just be hyper aware and have your ear to the ground so that you can like fix that mistake as soon as possible. Like, and sort of like certainly not double down on the mistake, right? And I think like there's certainly some of those lessons are like specific to like our weird niche of like developer experience and how to design developer facing APIs. But I think in retrospect we were just too sort of starry-eyed about this thing that we were just really excited that we'd made, and like we're so hey, like so cool, and look at all the things you could do with it. And we didn't sort of like step out of like from a user's experience, like how does it feel to use this, and like what are all the ways people could be confused by it, and what are all the ways people could sort of like get kind of like screw up their projects using it. And,
So definitely, like it sounds like you didn't involve the user early enough on in the journey.
Yeah, we sort of just stayed too like I think when you're sort of creating something for developers, right? Like you are a developer, and so like some of that, like your taste is like an essential part of the process. However, you do need to check in regularly to just make sure that your taste is aligning with what users are wanting, and figuring out almost how to structure it in a way that like if you sort of have messed up, you can kind of like pivot quickly. And structure the projects in that kind of way where you don't sort of realize you go 90% of the way down the road and you're like, oh wow, like we have to throw this all out.
Yeah, I totally feel that. And it's interesting because I was even talking to my team about this recently. Like everybody has a different sort of like gut feeling, right? About when like intuition, I would say, right? And so for me, my team has been hacking on this thing, but I was like, God, 2 months ago, I was like, I'm pretty sure that this is not the way it's going to go. And today my CTO comes to me and he's like, well, I'm pretty sure this isn't the way it's going to go. And I'm like, damn, I shouldn't have so it's like how do you know when to continue going down a path that you think is right, and when to say just kidding? Because you can go and create 10 different things, and then each one is like 2 steps ahead, and then you just kill all of it because you think it's not working. Or hey, you pull on this thread and it goes for, maybe you do it for 12 steps ahead, and then it still doesn't work. But like, where do you know when to sort of adjust and iterate?
Yeah, I mean this is like one of the key leadership challenges, and I think like the example that you were giving is especially interesting because it's like there's sort of 2 questions, like what's the right thing for the org to do, and then like what's right for me as an individual to do. And your sort of like your question that you were kind of wrestling with was sort of how do I should I insert myself into this process? How heavily should I insert myself into this process? Should I just sort of say something? Should I be like no, but like really I don't and there's some nuance, like, and I think for me, and I think my experience is kind of we just because we've worked with each other, like we have these kind of like weekly demo days, and so you can kind of demo the work, and like that's often a place where like I might see it, or like Shane, my co-founder, might see it, or Abhi, my co-founder, might see it and be like, okay, this is like, we shouldn't be doing this at all, versus like, oh, we should be doing this, but like this needs to be significantly different, or like we need to do this, but like here are like 2 minor tweaks, and these tweaks. So I think like the only way of kind of it's difficult to like, I think it depends a lot on sort of like are you the only person in the organization that is going to be able to offer this feedback, or like maybe other people can, because if other people can offer the same feedback that you're going to offer, like you can sort of like, you don't have to be as vocal with it, because like other people are in a position to also notice and give that kind of feedback, whereas like maybe you're the only person that notices that maybe you have the best sense of design in the organization, right? And so like you're like, wait, that is designed wrong. You might be the only person. You need to be a little bit more vocal about saying something in that sense, because you are kind of the domain expert on it, versus there's like 3 or 4 really good people who are really good at design, and so you can like maybe just be a little quieter in that case. I think like so it does depend, I think, on what the composition of the team looks like. But I think the thing that is universal is kind of the just like having a regular cadence of showing work and presenting work internally within an engineering team. Because I think that ends up just being a forcing function to honestly get more people's, maybe another developer, they aren't a user, but they're not you either. So like they can give you feedback that maybe is partially like what a user would say if you sort of demo it to them in demo day,
And it seems like your team is obviously like have worked together before, have been successful before. So you guys have sort of established, a vibe, right? I mean, the people closest to me, like, I don't have to sugarcoat something. I just say something, and nobody's going to take offense, if you will.
Yeah.
There's definitely, I mean, I see a lot of different organizations, and there's definitely some organizations where it's like, yeah, I mean, nobody wants to hurt each other's feelings, let's say, or how do you sort of create a culture that has that ability to sort of give the feedback in order for you all to be successful versus everybody just saying yes or agreeing or not wanting to step on each other's toes.
Yeah, totally. I mean, some of it is just, the trust that you kind of build over time. Some of it is like the folks that you bring in. I think like it's tough to evaluate someone completely in any sort of hiring process, but I do think you can kind of evaluate. One thing I do think you can evaluate is like how open they are to kind of feedback. And it's almost like the quality of the conversation that you have, because like a high quality feedback conversation is almost like, hey, I noticed this thing. Oh, interesting. So you might say that, and someone else is like, oh, so could I alter it like in way A, or would like way B be better? And then you can sort of like have this like good back and forth, right? And so I do think you can evaluate that like during kind of the process of bringing on somebody onto the team. I do think some of it is like just trust and like working, spending time working together, and like especially I think for teams that are remote, having time that's like in person, where you're out at dinner or at a bar or wherever, and just like having this like unstructured socialization time where you kind of get to know each other better. And then part of it is just obviously sort of like how does like what happens in the crisis situation, right? Like how well do you handle the crisis situation, and is it like it got done, but like like exactly the way the leader wanted, and nobody else had any feedback into it, or like was it more of like a collaborative process where people figured it out? And like I don't even think, like, I'm not making judgments one way or the other. Different teams just but like how that happens will sort of like help determine like honestly how the feedback giving cycle goes in the future.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, we always say with our clients, right? It's actually better when you have hard times, with teams, because it builds trust. Because it's all about getting through that together, and sort of like how people handle that. I mean, it's like any relationship, right? I mean, I don't know how long you've been in a relationship, but I still remember back in the day, it's like, okay, let's have our first fight and see how it goes, So like, if a woman
Yeah.
like try to instigate that, like I might have tried to instigate it because you want to see like how is the
Yeah.
person going to react to a fight.
Yeah, I mean, for us, like, for us, sort of like, I can definitely like pinpoint, certainly with with Shane and Abby, like, these are like the arguments that we had, and like, here's how we kind of like resolved that, and here's how our relationship sort of built over it. But I think like also, it's like the we went through some ups and downs at Gatsby. I think like hopefully folks we were kind of like an early leader in terms of like React based static web frameworks, and we were sort of like passed by Next.js and Vercel, and so that was one of the reasons we did get some a significant amount of revenue, but we also ended up selling the company, and that wasn't really how we had it in mind. We had to do a layoff as part of selling the company. Then like Netlify did layoffs, and the projects that we wanted to sort of like build into Netlify like didn't necessarily like happen the way that we'd envisioned, which happens in acquisitions, right? Like they don't go according to plan. This like everybody kind of, but like the team the team went through some like highs together, but we also went through some kind of disappointments together, and I think like we also are kind of like, hey, maybe the first time didn't end up the way we wanted, but like we get kind of this like second act almost
Yes.
to sort of like maybe things to try to make things go better this time.
Yeah. 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 But it's funny because I feel like you're very you're very much like me. Anytime anybody asks me how's it going, I'm always like, look, the response I'm going to give you is saying, it could be better because I'm always wanting to do better.
Yeah.
So, when people look in and kind of like look at Gatsby and the acquisition and the sort of stuff you've done for the web, it's like, wow, this is amazing. Like, of course, I mean, I'm familiar with some of the bumps that happened, right? But like, it's still a success, but you're like, no, I want to, and I'm very similar though, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
I'll
yeah.
never be satisfied.
Yeah, there's that, like when I heard the song in Hamilton, I was like, aha, I'm like that. That's I
Yeah,
will never be satisfied.
yeah, yeah.
um,
What I think is also interesting about our conversation is you're the first person I talk to where I feel like intuition, like the intuition you have, the intuition I have, the intuition founders have generally, sort of it's a very key factor to their success. And I think that we can say that for all leaders, right? Like you have to sort of listen or have good intuition.
well, here's another kind of thing to back up what you just said. Actually, like after we sold the company, we actually we just felt like, hey, maybe we were feeling a little bit burned out from the journey, and we were just kind of
Right.
like, we want to do something completely different. So we actually started working on this like CRM, and
Mhm.
it turns out we're actually pretty mediocre CRM like founders. Like we
Uh-huh.
don't have a
Uh-huh.
strong intuition of like how a CRM should be built, and
Uh-huh.
it kind of took us a while to realize that, and then we sort of switched. We kind of started building the AI parts of the CRM, realized that there need to be better JavaScript tooling for AI. I started building that instead, right? And then
Mhm.
immediately it was almost like a light bulb had gone on. It's like our intuition works again, and I think like that was actually the
Mm.
moment where we kind of were like, oh wow, like our skills are so specific. Like we've just been working in this like weird niche for like 10 years, and we understand that really well, and like we have this like weird intuition that like is very uncommon, but like it doesn't, as soon as you go outside the domain, like you lose, like not that all of it goes away, but like a lot of it just like doesn't work, and you're like, wow, my intuition is like so dependent. It's like it's so bumpy, it's so dependent on the problem that I'm working on, like, and having experience with that.
Yeah.
It's kind of humbling moment, I think, too.
Yeah.
You think like, I don't know, when I was a kid, maybe I thought I can just do everything or whatever, and it's like maybe you realize this is the thing I'm like really really good at.
Yeah.
This other stuff.
That is kind of the thing, right? That actually, when I was talking about this idea of, how long do you go down a path till you realize, it's wrong, but it's the same thing, right? It's like, okay, you went down the CRM path, but you sort of have to have that like, oh, wait. But I think also as a founder, anything I think to a lot of people is this idea of, you're building a new product, you're jumping off a bridge. Okay, is that bridge like what's it gonna be? And
Yeah.
people who are sort of like a little bit more risk averse, my team is very risk averse. Yeah, it's like, I don't know, but like as founders, you sort of have this like intuition. You that'll be okay, and then you found that thing, but you didn't know you were going to find the thing.
Yeah.
You found it, but you had sort of like this faith or something that like it would find itself.
But it's scary, and I mean, I think this is true for doing new things in whatever domain. My father is a scientist, and lots of people inside kind of companies build new products as well, right? But I think it's like you sort of, and it's almost this kind of like, your intuition is like ahead of the actual proof on the ground, and it's
Mhm.
your belief that kind of makes up the difference.
Mhm.
And you need to like, but this is constant calibration, because you're always kind of like a little wondering, like, kind of like, I mean, so I think what you don't always realize in the beginning, that like, you like when you're 20 or 25 or whatever, but like by the time you're like 35, you have a pretty good sense of like, yeah, I do know that like my intuition is ahead of the facts on the ground, and this is my belief, and like you're just kind of like calibrating a lot, like, am I am I overconfident here, am I underconfident,
Mhm.
it's an
Mhm.
interesting like mental game, right?
Yeah, yeah. I love that. I mean, it's been so much fun chatting with you. You're doing so much. You wrote a book. I recommended your book last night at a meetup. Yes, Principles of Building AI Agents. One of our good friends, James Quick, he was like, it's so funny because I think what was it? Meeting him at like, it was either Render or some recent conference I
Yeah.
went to, and he said, I'm not really in the whole AI game. And then it was great because all of a sudden I see him tweeting about, oh, I read Sam's book, and that's really sort of what got me going.
Hmm.
So I highly recommend y'all to check out that book for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
we give copies away for free if you want to go to Mastra.ai/book.
oh, perfect.
You can get a free digital copy. We can also send physical copies out. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely look out for that if you're in the Atlanta area and we actually started an Atlanta AI community on LinkedIn. So Sam's going to be sending me a few. So, happy to share those out. It's also available on Amazon. So I saw that you could purchase them on Amazon as well. Any last bits of advice for anybody?
I think like, and maybe this is good because you just mentioned the book, but one of our company values is like a line that somebody said to us in February, which is like generosity breeds luck. I think
Mhm.
like when, one thing that we've very much learned from open source is like when we sort of like put good things out in the world, when we try to help people learn how to build agents and give, help people learn how to build things in general, like good things will come back to you when you sort of like put good things out in the world. And I think that's like a lesson of life. It's a lesson of leadership. It's a lesson of a lot of things.
Yes, I totally feel that. I have to say I was last week I was struggling with something and I was like, I just need some freedom. And I went into Monday with that mentality. In Monday I gave myself a little bit more freedom, you know? And it was like that weird mind shift that all of a sudden all these amazing things happen on Monday.
It's so fascinating how that works.
It is energy based. I mean, we all try to sort of like find this sort of playbook on how this works or what do you do, or I have a lot of conversations with folks sort of like at the VP level talking about how to get into the boardroom, this, that, whatever, but like a lot of times it's just the energy you put out, the
Hmm.
relationships, the intuition you have. So this was such a fascinating conversation. Sam, where do we find you online if we want to learn more?
So you can find me on Twitter X at CalcSam. That's CalCSam.
Mhm.
You can also find me on LinkedIn. Um, please drop me. You can also email me at sam@mastra.ai. So just drop me a line and say hi. I'd love to hear from you.
Amazing. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Definitely check out for the next episodes coming out, and we'll see you all soon.